What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now Plus. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to review John Wick Chapter 4. Loved it. Let me just start out by saying, really did enjoy it. It's not without its faults. I do think there's some problems, and we'll try to talk about it as spoiler-free as possible. I think I can do at least a good amount of this review spoiler-free, and then when I get to spoilers, or if I get to spoilers, I don't really plan these out, I will let you know, okay? So right now, spoiler-free, I'll let you know if we go into spoilers. But let's just start out by saying it's a wild, wild ride. It's awesome. I really believe this is one of, if not the strongest of these films. I want to explain why, and I think I can probably do it relatively quickly. These movies, they need to be able to blend both halves, and one half is the action, right? So the action sequences have to be over the top. They have to keep topping, the ones that came before it, but they have to be incredible. They've built like a name, right, for the martial arts that Keanu Reeves can do, and a lot of the other characters, honestly, in these film franchises. So you got to nail the action. I think this movie does it. I think this movie does it better than pretty much any others. Now, with the topping of the action, what you end up going into is kind of length. So some of these fight scenes take forever. Now, I don't really think it's forever. Like, I don't feel that in the seat, but it's kind of a mixed thing because, like, my wife and I were joking, actually, during one of the earlier fights where we were like, they've been in this room for like 10 minutes. They just fight, fight, fight. In fact, there's an early scene, I'd say, within the first, say, 30, 40, 50 minutes where he basically, John Wick, fights waves of enemies. So, like, 2 or 3 of them will come at him. He will take a while to defeat them, and then another 2 or 3 will come in. I believe that happens 3 times until there's actually kind of like a boss fight. This movie reminded me of a game many times, and I do want to talk about one of those times in this review. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because, like, when we were joking about, or at least I was joking about it, I guess my wife can speak for herself, but when we're joking about it, I'm looking at it as, yes, this is taking a very long time for these combat sequences, but I'm also having a blast. Like, I really, I've talked about it many times before. I'm a martial artist. I really love this stuff, and I think these movies do it better than 99% of the things that are out there, honestly. I mean, you can tell these people put in the work. It's choreographed, but honestly, I think they do about as good of a job as humanly possible of making it look not choreographed. When enemies are attacking, we talk about this in games, actually, in different movies, you don't really want them standing around. And it's actually something I focus on quite heavily in these movies, these John Wick movies, and I noticed it in this movie in a good way, where if there's enemies that are not attacking any, specific character, there tends to be a reason why. Oftentimes in a lot of these action movies, enemies will just kind of stand around, right, and do nothing. Or there's too loose of a reason why they're not attacking. In this one, there's always a reason. It's because they're injured. It's because he kicked one of them. He threw something at one of them to kind of daze them. He flipped them over so they're on the ground. Then he goes to handle somebody else. He comes back. I mean, I'm spending a lot of time talking about this because this is so much of the movie. The movie has a lot of action scenes, and when it does, these action scenes take place over a good chunk of length. Honestly, it's why I go. I think it's why a lot of people go. I do want to talk about the other side, like the story, the world building that we have talked about with the John Wick franchise. But I think so many people go to see this movie to see John Wick murder hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals in unique ways. And that's another thing. I think they constantly are topping themselves. He uses different weapons, different environments, different settings, different, resources, because sometimes they're not even weapons, right? So many different ways of taking out these enemies, even in, again, the hand-to-hand stuff. I mean, a lot of these flips, a lot of these strikes, a lot of these takedowns. Like, I have seen some of them before. I kind of remember some of the flips that he's kind of done when he takes an enemy down, let's say, in some of the past movies. He does it again, but it's actually few and far between. Like, a lot of stuff, I believe, at least, just from an onlooker, tends to be original. So all of it, I mean, it gets like a perfect score. It gets a 10 out of 10. I mean, the action sequences, for however long they may be, and I don't blame people or I don't fault them if they think it is too long, and I totally respect that opinion. I would say, I would just flip it. I would say that's kind of the reason we go. Now, like, the first movie was kind of so special because it had both sides to things, had an interesting world, had interesting characters, and then also when it went for it with the action, it went for it, and it was kind of condensed. It was in your face, it was quick, and then it would move on. And these movies are a lot longer. This movie is a lot longer with the action sequences. They stay in your face for a long time. But honestly, I would argue that because this is a franchise and because these movies keep going, you kind of have to give us over-the-top action scenes. And now, when you get to that, you oftentimes get like kind of bullet sponges. Like so many characters in this movie, they pull up their vest. I mean, John Wick does it too. He pulls up his vest and he hides behind his, bulletproof whatever coat that he's wearing, and shots will just ricochet. And a lot of the enemies have those things as well. So often they're doing it, but I think that kind of makes it unique. I mean, again, I look to the hand-to-hand stuff. I like Keanu when he's looking one way, he's shooting, he lifts up his arm. He's always kind of thinking defense. Like oftentimes he always imagines, I assume, that he's going to get shot, so he always lifts up. I like it. I really like it. So you got all the action stuff, but then you got the other side of the movie, and I really do think it's roughly half and half. Maybe it's like 60-40 action, to be honest with you. But the other half of it is, again, the world building. And I will say this. I'm a big fan of the world, this world of assassins and this code and the table, the high table, right? All of this stuff. Now, they've built this, and I think they've done a phenomenal job building it throughout this entire series. I will say, the first movie, because it's kind of smaller and there's not too many like tiers of villainy, it's pretty easy to understand. Movies 2 and 3, they really started to expand what this world of assassins are, these bounties, these different rules that you have to abide by, right? All of this stuff. I would say this movie, I really do mean this, for as much as it does, I actually think it does it better in terms of keeping things moving and keeping things interesting versus other movies. That's a personal preference, but I try to remember, okay, what are some of these scenes in 2 and 3? And when I think to them, I think, okay, they're world building, and I think the world is incredibly cool, but that really, it kind of dives. It's not too exciting. I think when they do it in this movie, it's always elevating something. It's always kind of talking about some end goal, or it's like a plot. There's a lot of characters in this movie, which I'm dead honest, I actually think helps it, because there's all these different schemes and there's all this different, okay, well, I'll kill him, but you have to pay me, and if you don't pay me, well, I'll end up taking out your own guys, without your permission. So there's all this stuff that's going on that even when there's not action, when it is world building or it's trying to solve the resolution of this entire film, I actually think it's really interesting. And I would personally say it's more interesting than movies 2 and 3. I feel like I gotta give this movie the edge. Now again, it drags. The movie's like 3 hours long. There's a couple scenes in this where there's like a long shot on like a sun. There's one scene where Winston walks left to right in this kind of museum-like place, walks left to right, and it takes like 20-25 seconds, and they literally just keep on this man walking left to right. Now I love Ian McShane. I think he does a fantastic job in this film, but you don't have to do that. So I do think there's a couple scenes in this movie that I would have personally snipped and I would have kind of condensed, but all things considered, I think a lot of it was necessary. I mean, I think, what John Wick was trying to do, you have to show kind of that. You have to show the villains, and one of, Donnie Yen, he's a fantastic character, Kane, in this film, and he's very, complex is maybe not the right word, but he's an interesting character that you want a lot of time, and I think, honestly, in the past movies, he would have been one of those mini bosses. He would have shown up. He would have been a 10-15, like a Ruby Rose. Ruby Rose, I think, is kind of like the stereotypical, not in a bad way, because I thought that was awesome. But these movies have had a couple of them each, where there'll be like a side villain or a side boss, whatever, and they put them in the movie. They're big names, they're a big star, and they'll be in it for like 10-15 minutes, and they'll be something that John Wick really has to struggle with, like taking out, and then he ends up doing it. I think if this was a few movies ago, Donnie Yen would have been one of them. But because it's this movie, he actually has an entire, I wouldn't say arc, but he has an entire thing with his character. There's a lot that goes on, and you need the time. I think you need the time to develop that, because if he was only in it for 10 minutes, I think it really would have fallen apart. It just wouldn't have worked, I think, in general. I feel like I can actually go through the whole thing without spoiling anything. The ending is something. I don't know how to feel about it. It's also kind of left up to the imagination, so maybe we'll talk about that in a separate video. The beginning was actually quite shocking with a character that I won't mention. There's one scene, I kind of want to tease it. I'll just say it. You can maybe look at this as a spoiler. It's an action sequence. It's top down. So I don't know if that's a spoiler or not, but I just said it anyway. There's an entire sequence where the camera's looking at him, and then the camera goes to the top, and you're looking down. It literally looks like a video game. It's like a twin-stick shooter, a Dead Nation kind of thing. It literally looks like a video game where he goes through different rooms. He's rolling. He's laying down. He's shotgunning enemies with like fire. It's incredible. I do actually think it kind of goes on just a little bit too long. Again, I actually think some of these action sequences do go on too long, but at the same time, it's like, look, how many movies are you actually going to see this stuff? There's some over-the-top executions and ways that there's a lot of cars being used to take out enemies in this one. There's buildings. There's, again, this top-down thing with like kind of new weaponry. It's awesome. So even though I do think it kind of overstays its welcome a little bit here and there, you know, where else are you going to see John Wick from a top down? Literally looks like it's a video game, for heaven's sake. How often are you going to see that? So, I mean, can I really complain about it? Not really. I think this is an awesome movie, well worth it, all that jazz. But here's the thing. If you've watched John Wick 1 through 3, I don't think you're jumping off. I don't think this is a movie you're going to like skip or anything. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you're all subscribed, bell icon turned on. And I may do a video on the ending specifically maybe tomorrow or so, because I do want to talk about it just kind of all on its own. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all on the next one.